Strength training is like learning a foreign language. If you repeat "Donde está los baños" forever, your Spanish is not going to improve, right? Yeah. The point is that if you want to improve your language, you need more words, you need more complex structures, because the only way you know you speak a language fluently is that you can be funny in that language. Because you know how to make a pun, right? Yeah. So you could be witty. But to get witty in strength training, let's say the 700-pound bench press, that it takes years. But a more simple rule, you could say the program that gets you from 100-pound bench press to 200-pound bench press is not the program that's going to take you to 300-pound bench press. And certainly the one that's going to take you from 500 to 600 is not the same program at all. So things have to increase in complexity. That's why I would say, you know, we live in the age of information, and there's a lot of good trainers out there. Yeah. I would say to people, just pay for somebody good to write your program, and that will take care of it. To learn it, I mean, I've been doing it for 38 years, teaching it. I use my periodization based on your neurotransmitter profile. How much dopamine you make, how much acetylcholine you make.
Hey friends, it's Mike Meltzer here with HighIntensityHealth.com. Thanks for tuning back into another episode. I'm very excited today to be with my friend Charles Poliquin. He's been training athletes and Olympians for the past 38 years, and what's really unique about his approach, as you may know, he's always ahead of the science. And so what I've found that to be true since we've met back in 2008. Yeah, so you're always ahead of the curve, and some of the research that's coming out now you've been talking about and implementing clinically and with folks for a while. So commend you for your work, and thanks for coming on.
Thank you.
Let's kind of dive into January as we film this. You know, people are concerned about fat loss, right? Yeah. And they're always like jumping on the treadmill, doing the exercise bike. And one thing that I remember from conversations over the years is if you want to lose weight, you got to build muscle, and particularly like squatting and deadlifting and compound movements. So new science came out and kind of confirmed what you've been saying for a while.
Yeah, for about 38 years. So the thing is that clinicians are always ahead of the curve as far as the researchers. Lynn Jones was a coach of Olympic gold medalists in weightlifting, said, sports scientists are sport historians. They tell us why it worked 40 years after we did it. So that's one of the issues. But now with the internet, it's relatively accessible to have good research. But the Australians have a good expression for it. It's called "tax for catching up, mate." Research, right? Yeah. But it's just a reality.
Right. Now, is that part, what do you think that is? I mean, there's all kinds of metabolic adaptations associated with building muscle, and muscle increases our resting metabolic rate. Is it that, or is it just like the habits associated with weight training versus just chronic cardio? If you were to kind of like pinpoint.
Okay, it's multifactorial. The thing is that the key to fat loss, or if you want to win the war on fat loss, you have to win the insulin war. So you have to manage your insulin. So if you increase your muscle mass, you actually increase the number of insulin receptor sites. So if you have more receptor sites, you can manage your insulin better. But there's also the hormonal profile that you make when you lift weights. And if you look at long-term studies on exercisers, people who've done a lot of aerobic work, let's say Olympic rowers, Olympic cross-country skiers, are most likely to get Alzheimer's. Right? And there's a direct relation between how much kilometers they ran, swam, rode, and brain aging. Wow. So cardiovascular work increases oxidative stress. So I'm not so keen about it, unless you want to become Alzheimer prone. Yeah. But if you look at the research on people as they age on strength training, they've got better bone density. And it's been shown since 1982 at Tufts University that the best two predictors of how long you're going to live were actually muscle mass was number one, number two was maximal strength. So the top two anti-aging factors we know are related to weight training.
Right.
So there's that. And also the fact that you build new tissue prevents two types of ailments. One is sarcopenia and dynapenia. So sarcopenia is the death of muscle cells, but dynapenia is the loss of strength and speed. And now the Italian researchers identify over 416 factors that contribute to dynapenia.
Wow.
So I think the new wave in anti-aging would be actually to research danepenia. For example, there's a peptide I just saw that if you damage your sciatic nerve and you inject it, it will repair the sciatic nerve. So now there's a lot of advances. I think peptides is the new wave in preventing muscle loss, and then danepenia. But also, I think for repair of everything in your body, there is one peptide involved, right?
Yeah.
And another thing, I think you're right about the lifestyle. A lot of people who run think it's a hall pass to eat carbs, right? So I need my carbs, which is bullshit. You don't need your carbs. You have to deserve your carbs. So the weight training subculture is more nutrition aware than I would say the aerobic culture.
Yeah.
Or they're less prone to the bullshit. For example, saturated fats until just a few years were considered evil by mainstream, right? Now we know it's good for you. But there were guys saying in the 50s, no, saturated fats are good for you, they're not evil. So there's multiple factors, but I think weight training as far as managing your body composition is far ahead of cardiovascular work, that's for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to continue that discussion, but you mentioned peptides, and right now we're seeing a lot of research, or people are promoting SARMs, selective androgen response modulators. I personally think they're a little scary in a sense because downregulating your receptors, messing with that, I think is, but what are your thoughts?
Well, the thing with SARMs, I'd be a bit concerned about the fact that they could have a downregulation and maybe some stopping. I mean, one of the first pro bodybuilders to play with myostatin inhibitors now looks like a complete waste.
Wow. And
then, obviously didn't brag but when you start to use them, but it actually created danepenia and sarcopenia. So I think that you could go too far. So it's an interesting avenue, but it's not one of the things that would jump 2 feet ahead.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what I've read on the research too, because I know they're doing some studies on like cancer therapy and stuff, is it's going to suppress endogenous testosterone production anyway. So if you're going to do something that's going to do that, you might as well just do the real deal, right? Yeah. Your testosterone or whatever it is, if you're going to suppress your own production, right?
Yeah, I think it's the most exciting area of research, but for that, in that case, I would wait for the research to come out.
Yeah. Yeah. So stay behind the science a little bit.
Yeah, this one I wouldn't try to get ahead.
Yeah.
But for example, in regeneration of certain tissues, for example, the TB500 and the BCP157 to regenerate cartilage and ligaments, both in the clinical sense and what I've seen from research, the results so far are very good, but it's only been around for about 5 years.
Yeah, interesting. All right, just wanted to tackle that. Let's get back to weight training and stuff. So one thing that you taught me a long time ago, I don't know, AFMCP or something like that, a long time ago, is like, if you want bigger arms, squat, right? You want bigger delts, squat. What is it about the squat? Is there hormonal?
Yeah, so if you look at the research, and there's plenty of evidence, is that the larger the muscle mass you involve, the greater the anabolic cascade.
Okay.
So you can train your arms as much as you want. After a while, if you don't squat, they won't grow. But people are saying that, I could find you people saying that in 1896, okay? But it's true. So the hormonal response is always a direct function of how much muscle mass is involved.
Okay, so bigger the muscle group, greater the hormonal response.
Correct.
Now, so I had a friend who has a PhD in exercise science and stuff, and he was kind of like arguing in a polite way on the internet, you know how that goes, that it's not really possible to increase your baseline levels of anabolic hormones in the body, like testosterone or DHEA, through acute exercise. And I thought there's a lot of, like you just said, the research shows the opposite.
Actually, quite a bit of research shows the opposite. So if you look at long-term studies, some people are going to make more baseline testosterone for sure. And also the ratio between cortisol and testosterone gets affected. DHEA Sulfate, for example, the best 2 athletes I've ever coached, both Olympic gold medalists, had the highest DHEA Sulfate I've ever seen.
Really?
Were they born like that, or is it because they trained properly? I don't know. But DHEA Sulfate, I'm not big on so much on testosterone because one, it's hard to measure. 2, it's very transitory. But I think that if you measure DHEA sulfate 4 times a day and you measure your cortisol in relation to that, then I can tell you if you're really anabolic or not. Because there's a lot of guys that are very large who train naturally with low testosterone and are big, but they always have high DHEA sulfate. And I've seen guys with high testosterone not growing and they have very low DHEA sulfate. You know, people say DHEA sulfate is the mother of all your androgens. So maybe that's why, right?
It's kind of upstream of all
the... Correct. So I did work with an Austrian physician where we used to measure 17 variants of androgens. And at the end of the day, we could tell where you wasted your androgens, but the DHEA sulfate was always the predictor of how anabolic you were.
Wow, really interesting. What's kind of cool about that is, from a supplemental standpoint, it's very readily available, right?
Correct. But the problem with DHEA sulfate, it's sold usually in a bolus dose. So if you are going to supplement DHEA sulfate, I would prefer to use sublingual products.
Like little droplets.
Yeah. And then you have to monitor it. And then after a while, what's more important is to supply yourself with the precursors of DHEA sulfate, like plant sterols from pine, for example, will increase DHEA. Wow. So if you take 4 grams of plant sterols at night, I know this clinically, your DHEA sulfate will go up, you know, from a 3 up to a 10 within months.
Wow, that's amazing. Yeah. And there's other benefits of the plant sterols, right? Microbiome and all that.
And lowering oxidized HDL and oxidized LDL. It lowers triglycerides. Yeah, there's more to it than that.
That's really awesome. That's a really good tip. Let's kind of go back a little bit to strength. Well, actually, I guess DHEA for women, right? Is that a lot of women want to put on a little muscle, and I think muscle is kind of resurging in a good way for women. Is increasing DHEA sulfate in women going to lead to things like, you know, male pattern baldness in a female or facial hair?
Yes, if they use bolus dosages.
Okay.
What I found over the years is that someone suffers from adrenal fatigue and you give them DHEA sulfate in the spray form, and your aim is to get off it, not to stay forever, and try to make your own. Because a lot of things like anxiety will make you make too much cortisol, and that the same raw material that makes DHEA sulfate, the same raw material that makes cortisol, but if you're spending the whole day making cortisol, you're not going to make DHEA sulfate.
Yeah.
You know, if you look at in science, what is the best anabolic agent? It's sleep. And that, no one can deny that it's true or not. That's very well backed up. But what's the amount of percentage population that has good sleep? Based on clinical data, 72.8% of Americans complain of bad sleep. And if you look at obesity curves around the world, they actually the curve matches the sleep disorder.
Wow. So
Belgium, for example, only has 10% of its population that's obese, and only 10% of Belgians have sleep disorders, right? And then the same thing with Holland. So as people are fatter around the world, the worse their sleep is. So Australians are British people are second fattest in the world, and they got terrible sleep. And then I think it's Australia, and then you can match it. So quality of sleep is the most neglected thing. And then I say one of the best ways to do fat loss at low cost is not to look at a screen for 3 hours before you go to bed. But you know, people go to the bed with their texting and being on Facebook, you know. And then there's a good study from France that shows that when kids go to college, they gain 7 kilos of fat in the first 4 weeks. And in the kids who don't gain the weight, it's the amount of hours they spend on a computer screen.
Wow. Before bed?
In that case, it was total per week. But the thing that was interesting is that for all these kids, there was a sudden rise in their screen watching habits. And when you spend all the time watching a screen, you may eat while you're watching the screen, and then you know, who's going to cook themselves a ribeye and cauliflower, you know, while watching a screen. So people eat ramen noodles and
mindlessly just throwing it down.
Yeah.
It's interesting. Yeah, those gut hormones are really activated. I know you're a big fan of like chewing and being mindful. So that's a really important point. So yeah, the circadian rhythm aspect too. So you inferred from this data, right, that you're talking about, that screen time is like screwing with the circadian rhythms and all that, and that's affecting cortisol potentially.
But there's also a good study. They show that if you carry your cell phone on you, and they make contact with the body, your androgens are about 31% lower than somebody who doesn't put their phone on themselves.
Crazy.
So phones by themselves are castration agents.
Yeah.
Right? So there's a lot of ways someone can increase their androgens without resorting to any supplements. It's just, if people went on a screen diet, they would lose fat.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, for example, in Quebec, the average male spends 32 hours a week in front of the screen. If I was a teenager back in the day and I was an hour a week on the screen, I would get hell from my mother. We'd go outside. So, and kids are so inactive, right? So that contributes a lot to obesity.
Yeah, man, this is really just practical stuff that you're sharing, simple things that we hear about, but hearing it from you, I think has a lot of credibility, Charles.
Yeah, a lot of parents say, my kid's fat, what should I do? Take away his phone, right? And then the new generation, the worst thing is that they'll do their homework with a computer, text, and then have an iPad or a tablet, and they're actually watching 3 different screens. And then people say, well, they don't have any concentration or attention span. Well, no wonder, because, and for parents, I would say, you're allowed one screen when you do your homework, it be related to your homework, right? And then, because I find, for example, I go teach overseas, and I can actually tell if I'm teaching in Estonia or if I'm teaching in Sydney by the attention span of the students.
Is that right?
Like if there was like a silent movie, I could tell looking at the students how much they waste time electronically.
Yeah.
Like simple things. If I say, okay, we're going to go today and do 5 sets of 5 at a 4-0-1 tempo, 3 minutes between sets, they'll manage to ask me 8 questions in Sydney.
Because they're not paying attention.
Yeah, like how many sets? Why are we doing sets of 12? No, I said sets of 5. Like it's like, wow. And one day I lost my mind in Sydney. I said, you cannot retain 10 seconds of information.
Yeah.
So I said, and they also research, for example, that people who type information in class and do exams score 40% lower than people who do written notes. Right? 40 to 60% depending on which study. So typing doesn't make the mind-body link. So that's very simple.
Right.
I've always had very good grades in university, and people would ask me, like, can I borrow your notes before the exams? And I said, sure. And I'd give them a sheet of paper with like 15 words, and that was my semester of notes. And people would say, how can you study with that? Well, because I pay attention in class. The words are just to remind me of a concept.
Right.
So, or people that have a Kindle and you see everything is highlighted. Well, I tell people, you're only allowed to highlight 3 words per page. Force yourself to do that, and then you can retain a lot more information. So I think electronics contribute very much to our loss of fitness or increased fatness.
Yeah, which is scary. And I want to kind of finish off that thought with your library upstairs that is right above us. But you have tons of books. So I know you're an avid reader. You've recommended some books to me over the years. I assume you like the physical paper book, not so much the digital copy.
Nowadays, because I travel so much, it's not practical for me to carry all the books I want. But I'd rather always have the physical copy.
Yeah.
Right? I found a way around it is that I only underline 1 word. I force myself, if I make 1 word per page, but I always, at the end of the day, take a journal and write concepts I've learned from the book.
If you read electronically.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, that's a really
So
good
for example,
idea.
I got 2 of the Titans. I got, Tim gave me obviously my own written copy, but I've got it electronically. But I'll make, the advantage of the electronic version compared to a book is if you search for something, it's super quick.
Yeah, right.
But, information not retained is worth nothing.
Right.
So I always make a written list. This is what I learned from this book. I always try to find 10 things I learned from every book. And people say, well, you got a fantastic memory. Well, the memory just comes from training it. I wasn't born with special memory, but there's quite a few tricks to it.
Yeah, love that. Speaking of tricks, let's go back to fitness a little bit. I love that conversation about books and performance. I think is really valuable. But one thing that comes to mind when it comes to fat loss is the ketogenic diet. A lot of people, this is like Yeah, I've seen a lot of trends come and go, and the keto thing just seems to be like exploding like nothing else. And one of your big things for breakfast is meat and nuts. You've been talking basically keto, right, for a while. Is the ketogenic diet synonymous with hypertrophy and muscle growth?
The biggest problem I see, Mike, is people look at the world through a straw, right? And then if you look at the average carbohydrate consumption suited for humans, as an average for all humans on this planet, it's 40%. But some of us should never have a carbohydrate, maybe 10 licks of a dry prune every 6 months, and that's our genetics. Yeah. So there's different copies of the amylase gene, so some people can do very well in starches. So if you're from, let's say, Pakistan or Kashmir, you will find that the local population has multiple copies of starch digestion genes, and they do well on a high carbohydrate diet. But if you're Norwegian, tough titty. I mean, if carbs are not your friend, and I can prove it to you very fast, and your body, proves it to me all the time. So, I would say for 75% of Caucasians, carbohydrates are not their friend. But I'm not saying that I'm not like anti-carb Nazi. The thing is that the reality is that with the population I deal with, they do far better on a low carbohydrate diet. And now there's a lot of very good research on exogenous ketones. It's a way for people to catch up. I used to coach a lot of hockey players, and I made it very simple. I said, the protein you have eaten should have had eyes before, right? Yeah. So tofu does not have eyes, so you can't have that. Or I would say it has to run into a field, swim, or fly. If it doesn't do that, it's not a protein. And I would say if it's green, you can eat it. So basically a high protein vegetable diet for most people need to go on a fat loss. And then once your body fat is low, you should be, or you can afford to have carbohydrates, but it's not for everybody, right? If you're from, let's say, Macedonian or Serbian descent, you're part of those lucky Caucasians that can have a lot of carbohydrates. And actually, I find that for them, it's hard to lose fat on a high-fat diet.
Wow.
So some people do very well, but the problem with nutrition is the average nutritionist will recommend what works for him. What I do is I do what works for the client. But I'm going to repeat myself. For 75% of the Caucasians, it's no carbs, or very little.
Yeah. And if they do have carbs, do you like to have it like pre or post workout to kind of fuel those glycogen stores, or?
I don't like to raise insulin before I train. So the time where you're more worthy or deserving of your carbohydrates, Mike, is post workout. But most people would have better brain function, better sex drive, better sleep, blah, 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 on 50 grams of carbohydrates coming from starchy carbs, or like cauliflower, if you want to call it, but very
nutrient dense kind of
carbohydrates, yes.
Yeah. Sweet potatoes and things like that, or?
Sweet potatoes are permissible if you're lean enough, but I'd rather stick to green before you go to starch.
Yeah.
Some people can have rice, but the problem is that, let's say I'm emperor of all galaxies.
Yeah.
Okay. And then I decide, okay, I'm in charge of fat loss. Eliminating starches would be the quickest way worldwide to improve health. The problem is 58% of the world population would die within a week because there's no food for them.
Yeah.
So if you live in Africa, millet is a great source of carbohydrates. Is it the best type of carbohydrate for you? Probably not. But you never see a client say, oh shit, last night I went home, all I could eat was broccoli sprouts.
Right.
Fucking never see that, right? So they'd be like, I couldn't stop eating Pringles, chocolate chip cookies, chocolate covered cherries, or whatever it is. And the thing we have learned is how to manage our stress with carbohydrates, because we figured out thousands of years ago that if I raise my insulin, I'm going to lower my cortisol, which is my stress hormone. So it's quite normal for people to reach for carbohydrates when they're stressed, but what they should be reaching for is actually protein.
Yeah, and protein is something that you eat a lot of. I think there was a video that you recently posted about like you eat 2 to 3 kilograms of lean protein per day.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
I really like yak, because it's locally grown. I like elk. I really like wild meats because they're higher in omega-3s, less omega-6. But what I do with my protein intake is I go based on where I am today. So let's say if I go to South Sweden, I really like to eat the type of shrimp they have on their coasts. And then if I'm in Spain, I may have boar and rabbit and whatever, but it's important to vary your proteins. So when I'm here in Colorado, I tend to favor bison, elk, yak. I mean, I just bought a half a yak and then half a bison. Yeah. So that's what I like. And then when you eat high quality meat all the time is when you go overseas, you go, oh, okay, that's not meat.
And you can taste it.
Like in England, what they sell you as far as meat is probably recycled hockey pucks. I mean, it's fucking terrible. A, they don't know how to cook, but the quality of the meat is horrendous at best. So even if I go to Sweden, I'm in Stockholm, I will eat deer, or what they call moose, okay? And if I'm in Austria, everywhere I go, I have somebody that will source me the meat. So I found a guy in Switzerland that raises water buffalo, and he makes water buffalo mozzarella. And I thought until this day that either wapiti or yak were the best meats, but I've changed my opinion since last month. Water buffalo is probably the best protein I've ever eaten, as far as taste. And you could tell when you eat it how high it has of an omega-3 content.
Interesting. Parts of Canada, in Ontario, they have water buffalo. What about kangaroo meat in Australia?
It's quite gamey and it's low fat, but when I am in Australia, I will eat usually more fish. The thing though is that the way they raise cattle compared to the US, the cattle in Canada and Australia does have CLA. Wow. So the cattle taste is better than here, but I'd rather stick to kangaroo and fish on there, like lobster, or, seafood. Yeah,
interesting. So awesome nuggets there, Charles, on that. Let's talk about meal timing and frequency. There's, I think, this dance between optimizing longevity and then maintaining a physique that's aesthetically pleasing and high performing, So some people are saying do fasted workouts. Other people like yourself are like, no, you got to be consistent with your meal timing. I found personally, like, I'm the most muscular and feel the best when I'm eating frequently. And then in the back of my head, I have this thing like, well, what about calorie restriction? What about, all that? So how do we balance that?
I think the most simple way to answer it is what my colleague Klokov would say, eat when hungry. Yeah. So I think the problem is that people try to put everybody into the same basket. Yeah. There's a lot, I think, of genetic differences. If I were to go to 2 meals a day or intermittent fasting, I would be on CNN within 3 days for having killed the most people with my bare hands. Because I'd be the most irritable person in the world. Yeah. So, but also I have a lot of muscle mass, like a low percentage of fat. So for me, if I don't eat regularly, I'm a nasty bastard. So, but I found Will Clay, who won a silver medal in triple jump last Rio Olympics, eats twice a day.
It works for him.
It works for him.
Yeah.
So, but when people come and see me, I look at their dietary patterns and I say, maybe eat too frequently or too little, and then I play with that. But you can figure it out fairly fast. I find for myself, less than 5 times a day, it's terrible for me as far as like cognition, sleep patterns, and so on. And when I used to weigh about 30 pounds of muscle more, I had to eat 7 times a day. Wow. To be able to put on weight. Like, I had a plateau, I weighed 192 pounds, I couldn't gain it, but I was eating 5 times a day. And the day that I decided to go 7 times a day, I went to 214 within a year. Wow. So that was the limiting factor for me, but it works for me, doesn't mean it works for you. So, but to be fair, as the British would say, the biggest problem in nutrition is people try to follow like a guru. At the end of the day, you're the one that knows if it works for you or not. Yeah. And I would say 25% of Caucasians, who could also be on a high protein fat diet, do better on intermittent fasting. But I don't find it to be true. If you look at research on brain function and muscle performance, the data on intermittent fasting shows that it's actually negative. Yeah. I got guys who will debate me on that right and left. But the thing is that I've been doing this 38 years with Olympians, and I've been in many conditions where we control the amount of food the athletes have. Yeah. And as a rule of thumb, I would go more for high frequency than low frequency. But, you know, there's genetic variances have to be taken into account. So, you know, when I work with some, for example, I was coaching a lot in the NHL hockey for years.
Yeah.
And I found that most of my clients were Caucasian, because hockey is not that popular in Kenya. And then they respond better to high protein, high fat. And for them, it was like a big shock to figure out they didn't need pasta or bread to play hockey, and they actually had better performance. But I had a guy from Dutch origin, and he had a drop in performance. So I went 70% carbohydrate, 20% protein, and only 10% fat, and he did not have a single injury for 2 years.
Wow.
So he won the Ironman, the least injured guy in the AHL 2 years in a row. But for him, high protein. And then a few years later, I had another guy who won the Ironman, and he was in a completely different diet. So he was about like 70% fat, 20% protein, 10% carbs. So I think that you have to play with it. But if your percentage of body fat goes up, it's always probably too many carbs, not too much protein.
Right, or fat, really.
Yeah. Or shit fat.
Yeah,
you know.
Really interesting. So yeah, I really want to resonate and kind of reinforce what you're saying there. Is like, you're saying be your own test subject and be honest with your feedback. If you're gaining fat and not muscle, or you're losing muscle and strength, then tweak the diet around.
Correct.
And you're saying that basically, and I see this online, a lot of people follow the guru and do what works for the guru, and then say, oh, I gained weight, or I lost weight, or my thyroid went out of whack, or whatever the excuse is, because that wasn't the right diet for you.
For example, a few years ago, Bill Phillips on the ES said, I want you to get in really good shape. I'll put you on with Keith Klein, who at the time was the nutritionist of Lee Labrada, all the Mr. Olympians.
Yeah.
My body fat, we tested, was 8% on Monday. I went on this dietary protocol. By Friday, my body fat was 11.5.
Wow. And
I was falling asleep everywhere, and I almost got into 3 car accidents in Calgary because I couldn't stay awake. And it was a diet that had very low fat and moderate protein and a lot of clean carbs.
Yeah.
But I couldn't coach, I couldn't stay awake, so I called a friend of mine who was a nutritionist, and he was probably the first guy to turn me on to really genetic individualization. He said, no, this is what you're going to do. So I went on a diet where, for example, for breakfast, I would have salmon, it was really fat, right? Eggs. So I would eat protein and fats 5-6 times a day, and then I would only have carbohydrates post-workout. And within a month, I went from 11 to 4.
Wow.
Right? And I go, okay, that works for me. Yeah. But I also realized at that time that Lee Labrada was a great bodybuilder. It worked great for him, but I'm not Lee Labrada, so it doesn't really matter. The only thing that works for Charles Poliquin is what works for Charles Poliquin. So over the years, you know, there's some generalizations that you can make, but, you know, protein builds muscle. Yes, okay. But outside of that, I think you have to be. And I think that what people, one of the things I like about Tim Ferriss is that he monitors his blood work regularly. And I think we need to do more of that because, you know, your blood doesn't lie.
Yeah.
Right? So I remember I had this very top level executive. He worked for a major airline. And he started training with me, and he lost body fat, and he was following TRT, and it was done terribly, so we found him a better doctor. But he hit a sticking point, and then I said, let's look at your blood. And they had really high triglycerides, which did not make any sense. So I bluntly asked him, what is it you're not telling me? Well, he goes, I've got chocolate. Like, okay, how much chocolate do you have? And he had chocolate, milk chocolate, 6 times a day.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
But he wouldn't quit it. So what I did is that his secretary also trained at my gym. So I told her one day, when he goes out to lunch, call me. So I went in, and he had a drawer, you know, you could hide a cadaver in there, full of chocolate, right?
Wow.
So I took a garbage bag, took out the chocolate, and I replaced it with nuts and jars of glutamine.
Nice.
And I put heavy cream in his fridge. And I said, every time you have a dairy milk chocolate craving, put 2 ounces of high-fat cream, 35%, with 10 grams of glutamine, and drink that. I don't care if you have 20 of those shooters a day, it will turn off your brain towards carbs craving. It's one of my best tricks. And then suddenly, his body fat started to drop.
Wow.
You know, and he realized he was really addicted to chocolate.
That's amazing.
So there's some simple thing, and he thought that he was not doing anything wrong because it was low fat.
Right. That's incredible.
But his triglycerides changed right away. Another way that one of my best lie detector tests is hemoglobin 1AC. You can't cheat that test. You eat too many carbs for your genetics, it's going to go up, and you change your carbohydrate intake in a positive way, it drops.
Right. And it kind of comes full circle back to what you're saying with like strength training, you build more of those insulin receptors. And so, you can lose fat that way by modulating insulin. Carbs affect insulin. Just anecdotally, because I know I'll forget it if I don't bring it up now, one of the tricks that you mentioned a long time ago, I think 2009, 2010, the strongest I was in my life was having a morning shake of fruit juice and protein and glutamine. And then that was like pre-breakfast, right? So that was like at 6 in the morning. And so I really got a lot of strength from that. What was kind of the science behind that?
Well, you probably run better on carbohydrates than the average person. So some people need some carbs to do well, and the protein slowed down the carbohydrate. And also it depends what type of juice you're using, but glutamine also is a great immune system booster. So there's a lot of reasons why it could work, but if I were to drink that myself, it'd be asleep within 15 minutes.
Yeah.
So, and again, carbohydrate tolerance is highly genetic. So the mother of my daughter could probably drink maple syrup for breakfast, and she does very well. She's very lean. But for me, it'd be a disaster, it'd be a suicide.
That's amazing. Right. Couple last questions that I want. You mentioned Dimitri. I want to talk about habits of that. But we talked about glutamine a little bit as an appetite suppressant. Leucine.
Carbohydrate. Craving inhibitor. Yeah.
So the high fat and the glutamine together will help with the cravings.
Cravings, yes.
What about using leucine in the BCAAs as a way to enhance muscle building and hypertrophy?
I've been using BCAAs, I think Lincoln was president, but I was probably one of the first guys to use them in very large quantities. I'm still a big believer in it. And a lot of people say, in the studies they say this and that, but okay, what type of training protocol did you have? So for example, I've seen this online. Don't use more than 5 grams of leucine. It's a waste of time, right? Well, one day one of my fans sent me French books on supplementation. And they were quoting 2 pieces of French literature where they had people who trained for real. So, for example, the quadricep workout was 20 sets of 12 reps, 4 different exercises, 5 sets. So it was a real routine. And they gave the subjects in the experiment 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30 grams of leucine, and up to 30 grams of leucine. And it's a group who had the highest leucine who grew the most. So that was... So it's one study. So the same group of researchers redid a study, pretty much the same protocol, and this time they used chest and back, and it was the same thing. The more leucine, the better it is. For let's say a 200-pound man or a 90-kilo person, I really believe that the best dose of BCAAs is 40 grams. But it's doing my workouts, not a university study where you're on an isokinetic machine and you're not motivated because you're only doing a study because you want 5% on your term paper. So that's one of the reasons why I don't give much credence to most university studies, is that the training protocol is wimpy and the subjects are not really that motivated.
Yeah.
I work with Olympians and they're motivated and they'll do anything to get where they want. I mean, this morning I was training, Ellen Maroulis won a gold medal in first American to win an Olympic gold medal in wrestling, and the intensity she puts in her workout is probably more than all combined from a university student group. So, so most of my research, and what happens is that the feedback always comes back from my students. Okay, I've tried your protocols, and then I've tried your nutrition protocols or your supplement protocol, and now they work. But unless you put enough effort in the gym, it doesn't really matter.
You have to create that demand for that high dose to really work or whatever.
I remember doing a podcast for a nutrition company, and it was aimed at medical doctors, and they were like, holy shit, those dosages are about 3 to 10 times more than what everybody else recommends. But then as the weeks went by, people say, hey, it actually works. I mean, one of the best compliments I ever had was from Mark Houston, who's probably the best vascular health person in the world.
Yeah.
And he listened to me and he says, you know, did you know that the research on fish oil has only ever used 7 grams? I said, I don't give a shit. That's it. If you're really fat, go 30 to 45 grams of fish oil. So Mark went back to Tennessee and he actually started to use that with dyslipidemic patients, hypertensive patients. And he wrote an email to me, he goes, you're making me a lot of money. I said, why? Because A, I've got much better results, but I'm now in a fat loss business.
Wow.
Because a guy would come for high blood pressure, go on 45 grams of fish oil, and then his blood pressure would go down, but his wife would say, wow, you lost a lot of weight. So the thing that he taught me is I used to recommend a ratio of 10 grams of fish oil for every gram of carnitine. And he says, no, when you jack your fish oil up, he says, try 3 to 1. So 3 grams of fish oil for every gram of carnitine. So I said, okay. So then I started doing that and I had much better results.
Wow.
And then, so we met in 2001. And in 2008, he sent me a research paper from Canada. And it showed that the best dosages of fish oil for fat loss were between 45 grams and 60 grams.
Amazing.
Right? And the title of the email was "Clinicians are always ahead of the curve." You know, and then, but my rationale was the human genome evolved on 45 to 60 grams of omega-3s a day. So I said, let's eat like according to our genes, not the Levi's, but our genetic background. Right?
That's awesome.
And even when I first moved to the U.S., in the hockey world, I was known as the fish oil guy from Colorado. That was my nickname.
That's funny.
Because guys would like carry the fish oil with themselves, and I was using a lot. But then people misinterpret what I say. I say when you're fat, you eat that much. But as the athletes got leaner, they were down to 6 grams a day. But that part was left out. So, for example, I don't rarely use fish oil when I'm back home because I eat so much omega-3s in the meat I select. But if I have to go to the UK and Germany and Austria, you be sure I'm going to pack some omega-3s, right?
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, Mark's been on the show before, and he's a big fan of GLA as well.
Yes.
Is that your...
Very true. What you find is that if people use fish oil for too long, their GLA levels drop in your free fatty acid analyses. So I use a company from Canada called ATP Labs, and they add GLA in the fish oil and also some olive oil. So it depends how long you've been, but it is true clinically that your GLA drops.
So GLA, for folks who don't know, it's an omega-6, the only anti-inflammatory omega-6 fatty acid that's healthy.
Correct.
From borage and blackcurrant and all that. Two questions here, Charles. And periodization. You know, I know this is individualized and stuff. You talk about cluster training and periodizing, and I know this is probably individual at some level, but is there any generalizations that we can talk about for someone that wants to burn fat, build muscle when it comes to periodizing your workouts?
The most simple rule is this: a program is only as good as the time it takes you to adapt to it. So people think there's a magical routine. I just wrote a book for the Tim Ferriss crowd, and it's a mass building book. And we created a private Facebook group. But the feedback every day is like, man, this shit really works. But what they do is they get a new program every 2 to 3 weeks. The most simple way I could explain to you, Mike, is that strength training is like learning a foreign language. So if you repeat "Donde está los baños" forever, your Spanish is not going to improve, right? Or "Dos cervezas, por favor." So the point is that if you want to improve your language, you need more words, you need more complex structures, because the only way you speak a language fluently is that you can be funny in that language. Because you know how to make a pun, right? Yeah. So you could be witty. But to get witty in strength training, let's say the 700-pound bench press, that it takes years. But it's a more simple rule. You could say the program that gets you from 100-pound bench press to 200-pound bench press is not the program that's going to take you to 300-pound bench press. And certainly the one that's going to take you from 500 to 600 is not the same program at all. So things have to increase in complexity. That's why I would say, we live in the age of information, and there's a lot of good trainers out there. I would say to people, just pay for somebody good to write your program, and that will take care of it. To learn it, I've been doing it for 38 years, teaching it. I use my periodization based on your neurotransmitter profile. how much dopamine you make, how much acetylcholine you make, how much, or you may not have any dominance. And I remember I had three girls in here training for the Olympics, and they're like, she does this, I do that, like they're having an anxiety attack. And I said, well, because you're three individuals, this won't work for you, and this won't work for you, and this won't work for you. So you're all going to do what I tell you works for you. So over the years, I was the first guy to make that link between neurotransmitter dominance and what you need to do. Some people need a lot of change. Some people like comfort and no change. And that you have to be individualized. But if you want to make it like what I call a 70% rule, something that works 70% of the time, is change your workout every 4 to 6 workouts for that body part. If you do that alone, you'll be way ahead of everybody.
Yeah.
Right? But some, I mean, the wall is full of all these Olympic medalists I've coached, but, I remember in my center in Phoenix, there was hockey players, and they were having an anxiety attack because the programs are so different. And
they didn't like the novelty.
No, they were
too
like,
much. Yeah.
Why is he doing that? Like, are you giving him an advantage? And I remember Joe Nieuwendyk, who at the time was playing for Dallas, he was like, why is my program so different than everybody else? And I said, actually, Joe, the New York Rangers pay me extra to ruin your career. So I'm writing you a most terrible program because I want you to be out of the league from an injury. And he almost teared up. He was, are you kidding me? I said, of course I'm kidding you. I said, I'm writing you a program for you because it works for you. Al McGinnis is doing something else because it works for him.
Yeah.
So shut up. So that's the simple rule about periodization.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's really good. So for people that are novelty seekers that like variety, then they should do variety. If they like to comfort and stick in the rut, then do that.
Some people do too much variety, so it's like learning 70 different words, but they don't master any words. So the one rule for learning foreign language is that you need to repeat, but some people don't need to repeat a lot.
Yeah.
Right? And some people need to repeat a lot.
Yeah.
So that's why there's so much differences. And I found, like, for example, even within the same sport, there's so many differences. Like in wrestling, some people are winning their matches very fast. Some people calculate everything. I remember being in Cuba with these 3 girls, and that day they all won the gold medal at the World Cup. And those ladies have what I call the growth mindsets. They just got the gold, and 2 minutes later were sitting beside me and they said, what do you think of my match? Where am I weak? It wasn't where am I good? Did I do a good job? It was like, and I said, actually you have a shit grip, we've got to work on your grip. Your lower back is terrible, blah, 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 blah.
Wow.
But
they're really open-minded about improving their weaknesses.
The best athletes are, right?
Yeah.
But that's when they made a link about saying, okay, you know what you're doing, right? And then, like, Helen was here about 2 months after she won her gold, and we went over her objectives, and I said, and then she came over here even during New Year's Eve to train with me, and I said, this is how it's going to go. She goes, well, why didn't I do that for Rio? Because I said, you showed up 18 months before Rio, and I didn't have enough time. So my job was to get you in shape to win a gold medal. But the training's pretty different now where I'm going for Tokyo. I said, because we have 4 years.
Yeah.
So I showed you enough, let's say Spanish to get to the border, but now I'm going to make you fluent in Spanish.
Yeah.
So that was the goal.
That's really awesome. There's a book out there called by Marshall Goldsmith. He wrote Triggers, and it's all about this nightly routine. And one of his books is What Got You Here Won't Get You There. So it's what you're talking about in the bench press. So as you become a better squatter or a better whatever it is, bicep curler, if there's such a word, you got to switch it up, that variety. I really like that. Like that pun where if you can joke it in a foreign language, then you're starting to master that.
Correct.
Which is really good. So let's wrap it up on mindset and behavior strategies associated with like high achievers. Dimitri, I know you guys, we'll talk about maybe who Dimitri is for those that don't know and stuff, but you guys went around the world and taught strength camps and things. And is there any commonalities in mindset or behavior that really separates the good from the great? The biggest dominator that I've seen for high performance is growth mindset. It's never good enough, right? And what you find, it's always like, what can I do next? And I've coached Olympic medalists in 22 different sports, and I went to 3 Olympics myself as a coach. And I remember every Olympic that I went to, that
the Olympians I coach, one would come and seek me out on the bus back to the airport, because in every Olympics I went, the airport was at least 2 hours from the Olympic venue. So the guys had time to come and see me, but it was like, okay, I'm back home March 15th, what do I do next? It was never like the Olympics were over. It's like, what's next? So that's the most common denominator. What I find is that the difference between humans and animals is that I don't think eagles will go like, next year I'm going to eat 17% more rats and I'm going to steal that motherfucker's territory, right? So animals do what they do all the time. They may adapt with the change in the environment, but the difference between humans and animals is actually goal setting. And you build a well, that's called the well theory, then the whole environment changes, right? So it's the same with and I've worked with top level performers from the business industry because they want to get in shape, but the 80% of the success people I know have a grateful lot, they journal, and they practice mindfulness. So they all learn TM, or whether it's Schwarzenegger or Tim Ferriss or one of my athletes, they learn meditation. And the thing that I've learned over the years is that I've known this since '82, but it's confirmed every year, is never increase quantity at the expense of quality. And I used to work 20 hours a day, and I work 2.5 to 4 hours a day, but I'm actually more productive. And if you asked me if you redid your life, what would you do? I would sleep more, and I would actually work less. I think we live in this society where we equate more work with better. And one of the things with the athletes, I remember being at a World Congress in speed skating, and we had won 17 medals at the World Championships that year in speed skating. And they asked a technical skating coach and myself to present our program. And people said, those fucking Canadians, they are lying because our volume of work was so low. We were actually successful because our volume of work was low. The intensity was really high, and there was somebody there who was translating from English to whatever language. And when we were speaking, the Koreans would get very agitated. So we asked a Korean interpreter, what did they say? And they said, those motherfuckers, they're lying to us, and let's triple what they say they do. Wow. That's probably the truth. And it turns out that 2 Korean girls came to train with the Canadians. And after about a month, they came to see me in tears with the interpreter. And they said, I know this is disrespectful, but when do you guys do the secret training? They're like, what do you mean secret training? She said, well, you guys can't be that successful with that little work. I said, there's no secret training. I said, I swear we don't go, hey, at 4 o'clock we're going to go to the arena. So I think that if people are more conscious of being focused, like turn off your cell, turn off your computer, turn off your Facebook, and just work, right? And like I've been shooting a bunch of videos for my upcoming membership site, but when I was writing the scripts, it's like everything is off. But what I found, for example, is that if I prepared a certain way, we shot yesterday in one day what previously was taking us 3 days to film.
Wow.
Just with the power of saying, okay, who's the client and what does he want to know, right? As opposed to what I think they should know. Right?
Love it. So I know you're a big fan of that book, Mindset by Carl Dweck at Stanford. So we'll put that in the show notes for sure. I know some of your posts, you talk about that, and that really talks about that growth versus with limited mindset. I can't remember the opposite.
Yeah, basically what happens is that one thing that I've learned a long time ago is I never reward being good. I always reward effort. And then if you reward effort, whether it's you're raising your own child or your employees, because as soon as you tell this is good, people don't want to disappoint you. And they don't put in the effort.
So they won't even try sometimes, hey?
So if you give a kid a puzzle and you tell them, oh, you're very good at solving puzzles, then you won't take a second puzzle. But if you say, you did a great job at solving the puzzle because you worked hard, they'll ask for a second puzzle. So I have found over the years that the other day I showed Helen how much progress she's made in a year and a half. So I did one of the workouts she did a year and a half when she met me, and I went through it. And I said, look at your numbers.
Yeah.
Right? I said, that's not good enough. So in the computer, there's a way that I can measure the percentage of the goal she wants. I said, that's Rio goals. Now we look at Tokyo goals. Yeah. The Rio goals are no good anymore. That's a new standard. Right? So for example, she did 2 pull-ups here with rings with 30 kilos.
Wow.
She weighs
on the belt, yeah?
Tied to her waist. The day she left to Rio, which was 2 weeks before she competed and won the gold. But I told her, for Tokyo, I want 50 kilos.
Nice.
Right? So nearly her body weight. She's moving up a weight class. But the point is that, and I know when she left here, she knew she could do it. But if I told her 18 months before that she could have done it. Yeah, no, it's a good job you did your body weight. Actually, when she first came here, she could do 0 chin-ups.
Wow, that's impressive. Yeah, you have a lot of videos on how to properly recruit the muscles for chin-ups. We'll put links below that video. Yeah, Charles, lots of great information, but it kind of, to come full circle about the fat loss, are you talking about like volume? I think one of the mistakes people make with cardio is volume, so they end up the cortisol and the hormones.
I think most people can reach their fat loss goals on 4 hours a week.
Training.
Yeah, that's all you need.
Yeah.
Of course, if you do twice a day, it's going to go faster. But the point is that you also need to have a life. So it depends if you're competing against Ronda Rousey, or you're Ronda Rousey and you want to get in real shape, then I would say you need to train 2-3 times a day, right?
Yeah.
But for the 70% rule, 70% of the population could reach their physical goals at 4 simple hours a week. But it's like the quality you put in those hours, right? I tell people, if you train more than an hour, you're making friends. It's impossible to train longer than an hour without maintaining quality.
If you train like you want them to train, like you hardcore,
Correct. But what the average person do that, that's why, I don't do my dentistry work. I wouldn't do self-brain surgery. So go see an expert, someone who has experience, and get it done. I mean, there's research that shows that the average citizen, 47% of them get their training advice from friends.
Wow.
Which is like...
If 70% of the population is obese, then they're not getting good advice, right?
That's for sure. That's for sure.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, Charles. Well, we have a few final questions here that we ask every guest on the show, and you talked about like mindset and stuff like that. We know that morning routines are really a great way to start the day. You talked about gratitude and meditation. What do you do in the first couple hours of your day?
First thing I do is I have my journal, and I write, today, what I'm most proud of is, and I write it like it already happened. So for example, Saturday night I had to do a PowerPoint presentation for the filming. So Saturday morning I wrote, today I'm most proud of completing the 2 enemy sections of those videos, and that was it. So in my mind, it's like, this is what's gonna happen. So it already has happened. So that's how I write my day. Then I write 3 things I'm grateful for. But I think you have to lower the bar in gratefulness, because people say, I'm grateful for my dog, I'm grateful for my family, but you end up not seeing simple things. So let's say if I'm at a really great hotel in Hong Kong and I've been comped up, I could say, I'm grateful for being comped in this room, and the bed sheets are excellent, right? So I try to pick 3 different things. Some come back, right? And then before bed, I write down 3 fantastic things that happened today. And I think that sets up my subconscious mind to have fantastic things happen, right? So for example, last week, when I was journaling, somebody offered me, free of charge, the super duper sauna with all these frequencies and whatever, and I didn't ask for it, right? So that was an exciting thing. And then I renewed this contract, blah, blah, blah. But if you write it and you fuck nothing fantastic happened today, then I go like, my life needs an overhaul.
Right.
And then I write 3 things that could do better. and then could be don't watch TV or whatever it is. I mean, it doesn't really matter. But so, and also being self-critical, okay, or that phone conversation was too long. Look,
shorten it up.
Shorten it up. It could be, or I could say, I need to find a better source of duck eggs. It doesn't really matter. But if you set up your mind, so every day when I review my day, it's like, okay, was it a really good day or was not? But I set up myself in the morning to be a great day.
Right.
And at night, I better find 3 fantastic things that happen. And sometimes I only get 1. I don't get 3 out of 3 every day. But so that's the mindset that I work. I mean, and that's why I've been able to produce so many articles and stuff like that without working that much.
Right. That's amazing. That book, Triggers by Marshall Goldsmith, he goes through exactly, and you probably haven't read it, I don't think, but I'll send it to you. It's that self-evaluation at the end of the day, because that creates then subconsciously, so throughout the day you're like, well, if I didn't do as good on my weight training or my food, then the next day it's subconscious that you're going to work on that. So I love that approach, Charles.
Yeah, and the thing, for example, I spent 3 months with, 3 weeks with Matt Denning and Ed Cohn, which are 2 top powerlifters. And every day I learned about 3 different tricks. And one thing that I like to write also is, what did I learn today? And I think a good practice is once a month is to reread what you written down, and then you can see the progress. And sometimes, let's say if I'm going to do a podcast or a Skype call and I got 10 minutes to kill, I'll pull out one of my old diaries and go, oh, that used to excite me. And I was like,
it seems so small now.
Yeah,
right?
correct. Yeah. But that day that I wrote that, it was fantastic. Right? So that's one of the things.
That's awesome. So if you're stranded on a desert island, okay, you can only bring 1 herb, food, botanical, or nutrient with you. What are you going to bring and why?
I'm really big on brain-ready carnitine.
Okay.
So acetyl-carnitine, the propionate forms, whatever. So I think carnitine, because we don't eat enough meat, I mean, I eat plenty of meat, but I find that carnitine for me, I need to take about 3 to 6 grams a day to work at my best.
Yeah.
As far as a plant, it'd probably be curcumin. I think that the right form of curcumin has so many effects. And one of the things that the research shows is that it reverses Alzheimer's. My mother is dying of Alzheimer's. Luckily, I don't have the gene for Alzheimer's, but I'd rather have a well-functioning brain for a long time. Yeah. As far as food, it'd probably be water buffalo with that. I mean, I really like wapiti. The problem with wapiti, it's so hard to find. You can only find it in Canada, right? But that would be it.
Yeah. And the form of carnitine, acetyl L-carnitine, that's a form you like?
That's one of my favorite, but personally I take a supplement that has 4 forms of carnitine. Because the different, Sinatra, the heart specialist, showed that if the maximum dose you could take any ester of carnitine is 2.4 grams at a time, but if you use multiple forms, you could take more carnitine. Wow. And if I have to do a lot of mental work, I'll use 10 grams of all 4, of the different 4 forms of carnitine. Nice,
that's a really good tip. Well, so Charles, you've traveled the world, you've been all over, probably every country there.
North Korea.
Yeah, you've been everywhere, right? So if you were to bump shoulders with a member of the parliament from a different country or someone from the World Health Organization in an elevator and they turned to you and said, Charles, you've been training Olympians and Olympic athletes for 38 years. What sort of lifestyle or health tip do you want me to know so I can improve the health of my country? What comes to mind?
If you made me like Emperor of all galaxies on that stuff, I would probably ban soda or tax the fuck out of it, right? And take that money to go towards education, right? Every president has always bullshitted us that they're the education president. Clinton did that, Obama did that, all bullshit artists, right? So one thing, for example, one of the favorite places where I like to teach is Finland. And the Finns are very well educated, and I think that if we looked at what the Finns do, like I can tell, let's say with no accent, if the guy's Finnish or not. Just because the questions are always smarter, and I find the Finns have a very good critical mind. So if there was an education minister, I would say, look at the Finns. They have very low crime. People who've dropped out of school in Helsinki, the average per year is less than 5.
Wow,
right?
That's amazing. Wow.
Okay, so that shows the education system is much better. But if you were to ban soda or tax the hell out of it where it's like unaffordable, then I think that would be, in my opinion, the biggest, like Joe Polish calls it, it's liquid Satan, you know? So if you ban soda, that would be the biggest thing, I would say.
Yeah, that's huge. It's scary. I mean, you go to Hawaii or other parts of the country and they're shipping this stuff. I mean, just like from the environmental standpoint too, you mentioned health is huge. So I love that tip. So kind of, Charles, as we part ways, I just want to have a moment of gratitude. I'm very grateful for this conversation.
Oh, I'm very glad you asked me to be on your show.
Absolutely. As we've been going back and forth online for a couple of years, about like when we can finally do this. But I want to mention, I've been, one of my morning routines is journaling, and your name has been on there a lot. Charles Poliquin, and gratitude has been huge. So I really appreciate that. So I know you have some online programs. Strength Sensei is your website, which we'll have a link below this video. But talk to our listeners a little bit about the online coaching program, the mass training program.
So what happened is Tim Ferriss asked me to write the ultimate book for mass building. So we only made it 2 weeks available. And my policy is that I only make it available to people who listen to a good podcast. So let's say if your listeners want, then I'll make it available. We'll give you a link.
Sure.
And they could buy it. The reason is that I like to have intelligent people come and read the book.
Right.
No offense, but I kind of like to pre-qualify my listeners. And so I did one with Dave Asprey from Bulletproof Coffee. I'm going to offer the book. But and the other thing that's coming up is we come up with a Strength Dojo. So that's a membership site that's coming up in about 2 to 3 weeks on my website. And it'll be 8 items a month that come in.
Cool.
I'll show routines, I'll talk about nutrition. One of the features, for example, is gyms around the world. So I just filmed probably one of the best gyms in the world called Das Gym, very original, in Austria. And people who have sneak previewed the video were like, wow, man, I didn't know that stuff existed. And I've got very good students and a lot of leaders. One thing I'm proud of is that I've developed the leader probably in each country for fitness over the years. And my mission now is to educate as many people as possible. 3 years ago, I was very fortunate to have a private lecture with Schwarzenegger. And he said, you have to break the mirror and look at who's behind the mirror, and that's who you're going to help. And I realized over the years, the more I've been online, the more I realized that what I think people already know doesn't exist. And the main issue with that is actually mainstream media. How many years we were told that saturated fats were bad? You look at Hitler, he killed 12 million people, and Stalin apparently killed about 60 million. But one guy that's more of a mass killer, I could call him a serial killer because he prone cereal, was the cholesterol guy, right?
Right.
The guy who perpetrated that myth, Ansel Keys. So, and if you were to calculate how many guys he's killed or women he's killed with what he preached for nutrition, I mean, he makes Stalin look like a kindergarten bully, right? So, but the advantage, is that now we have access to a lot of information. The problem, it's confusing for most people, but for the next few decades, I want to educate as many people as possible, and thank you for having me on your show.
My pleasure, Charles, and I'll put the links for that on at highintensityhealth.com/mass, so if people are interested in that. And if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel, and all the links and show notes will be in the descriptions below. So Charles, really appreciate you coming on.
Yeah.